Shabbat Shalom. When returning from a trip, friends may often ask you, how was it? And a typical response is something like this. Well, we got to the airport early. You know, those security lines, you never know. It's hit and miss. Unfortunately, when we arrived, we learned our connection was delayed. We're supposed to catch a 6 p.m. flight to New York and then on to London with a 2-hour layover. After an hour and a half delay, we boarded. And even though we were concerned we would miss our connection, there was a feeling of relief. Unfortunately, it was short-lived. The plane pushed back from the gate, and we sat on the tarmac for another hour, 20 feet from where we started. Can you believe it? And then the captain offered some sort of explanation. We didn't really believe it anyway. Ultimately, it took off. And when we landed, we ran from our gate, and then we tried to make our connection, and we made it with moments to spare, finally relief, until we landed in London. We were there, our bags were not. I was so angry at the airline, I registered a complaint. I sent an email. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry to hear. What a bummer, that trip. How was London? Well, London was fine. I think that is somewhat of a typical response when people ask about the journey. We get a lot of details about the journey, but we get very few about the destination. Well, if you think that is a new way to report travel, it's not. Consider how the Torah records the journey of our people from Egypt to the Promised Land. And let me tell you, if you are into detailed itineraries, the Torah is the book to read. In fact, in one of the Torah portions, I think it's Ma'aseh or Matot, it actually lists every single place we stopped along the way, 42 places where the Israelites camped out along the desert highway, along the dark desert highway. Sorry, Eagles, we came up with the idea before you. What's of interest here, I think, is why the Israelites get the list toward the end of the journey, as if it's review. Why doesn't the Torah tell them in advance where they're going to be stopping? After all, they knew the destination. It was the Promised Land. And I believe there's a reason for it. I believe there's a reason we get it in retrospect. It's so that we will have an enduring memory of the journey. And it's memory that I want to speak with you about tonight. If you want to get a sense of how important memory is, it is quite literally a mitzvah. It's not one of those things when people say, do this, it's a mitzvah. Jews do that all the time, by the way. That's a mitzvah. There must be 40 million mitzvahs. This is a real, live mitzvah in the Torah, the commandment to remember. I believe there are actually 6 times we are commanded by God to remember. It's a mitzvah to have collective and individual memory. I'll just reference 2 of the 6 because they're especially pertinent to us at this moment in the Jewish year. We're commanded to remember the incident of the golden calf and all other times when we, the Jewish people, angered God. In the Torah, God says, remember, never forget how you provoked Adonai, your God, to anger in the wilderness. And the golden calf happened in the Torah just last week. That's where we were. But we're also commanded to remember the Exodus from Egypt, Passover, which we will observe in just a few weeks. We are smack in the middle of both of them between the golden calf and Passover. But why is memory so important that it's commanded by God? I want to share with you 5 thoughts about why the need to remember is absolutely crucial. The first is memory can bring wisdom. Without the memory of what happened in past generations, every generation would essentially start over again. Some of you know that I love to ask the question both to individuals and to groups. And I'll ask it to you here. How many of you are wiser today than you were 15 years ago? Raise your hand if you think you're wiser today. Everybody does. Virtually everybody does. You're wiser because of your experiences and because you remember your experience. And your children can gain that wisdom only if you teach them. And they commit those lessons to memory. You know, it's interesting. There's always a move afoot today. Let's make sure we hear what young people think. And by the way, it's important. But I also think young people want to hear from you. Young people appreciate your wisdom, what you have to say about life. After all, you've experienced it, and they appreciate the experience and the wisdom that you can impart to them. Which leads me to the second reason I think memory is so important. Memory gives meaning to history. If something's forgotten, it's as if it never occurred. And that's why it's a lament to me that so many don't know basic history. It's vital that every nation, every group teach the next generation what happened to them in their history, what shaped them to be who they became. Think of the two words associated with the Shoah, with the Holocaust. Never forget. One would think you would not need such words to remind you of this horrible calamity in world history. Why would we have to be never forget? And that's because we do forget. So many Americans have forgotten what this country became and why it became what it became, what shaped our nation. Which leads me to a third reason I think memory is so important. Remembering is essential for moral progress. Years ago, I read a book by Thomas Cahill. It's called The Gifts of the Jews. And in the introduction to the book, he wrote the gifts of many people. He's not Jewish, by the way. He wrote about the fact that one of the gifts the Jews brought to humanity was that until Jews came to the world, people saw the world as cyclical. In other words, each generation would start all over again. But Judaism taught that the world should be linear. That means each generation would build on the previous one before it. Each generation would want to leave the world in a better place for their children. And by the way, isn't that true? Don't we want to leave this world a little bit better for the next generation? Isn't that why we strive so hard to improve society, to eradicate disease, to elevate moral discourse, to end aggressive war? We want the world to be better for our children. But in order for that to happen, we have to remember, we need to know the experiences of those who came before us. Which leads me to a fourth reason memory is so crucial. Memory makes gratitude possible. Without memory, there is no gratitude. And Passover is a prime example. With our Seder coming up in a few weeks, the focus is on remembering what God did for us, that God took us and freed us out of Egypt. And to this day, 3,200 years later, we remain grateful to God. I'll never forget, years ago, the Dalai Lama was being interviewed. And someone asked him about the Jews, and first thing he pointed to was how the Jews have memory. We have institutionalized memory. We make sure we don't forget by the holidays that we have, by the teachings that we do, etc., etc. Only if we remember the sacrifices that other people made for us do we appreciate the freedoms we have today. If we cease, we forget to be grateful. On a personal level, most of us need to remember and be reminded what our mother and or our father did to raise us, or we may cease to be grateful. It's so important to live in the moment. I'm a big fan of living in the moment, to be aware and appreciative of what's happening in our lives at the moment. We shouldn't be stuck in the past. However, without memory, we become stuck in the present. There's no context. There's no gratitude. And finally, memory grounds us. As Jews, it reminds us we are a people with a mission to bring Torah to the world, to be an or lagoyim, to be a light unto the nations. Think about it. Tomorrow morning, we'll read the Torah. Every week, we read the Torah. Year after year, week after week, the very same book, the very same words. Why do we do that? To gain wisdom? Absolutely. To gain insights on how to live life? Yes. To learn about how to be a better human being? Yes. But it also is for memory. It reminds us from where we came and what we need to do as Jews. Year after year, week after week, we are reminded. We just chanted the silent Amidah, the prayer, the most central prayer, by the way, in the prayer book. It's called Hatafillah, the prayer. Remember how it begins? Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, God of our ancestors, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, God of Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. We say those words to remind us of our past and to remind us of who our ancestors were, and we say it 3 times a day. Memory is a gift, and we know it, especially when we meet people who begin to lose their memory. They forget who they are. And there's an emptiness and a sadness when faced with memory loss or diseases which ravage the mind. So it's so important to us that our memories not be fleeting. Judaism makes memory part of our DNA, and that's why the Torah actually has 6 mitzvot reminding us to remember. It's necessary for wisdom. It gives meaning to history. It's necessary for moral progress. It's a key to gratitude, and it grounds us as Jews so that we don't forget our past or our task. So, with the golden calf incident in our rearview mirror and Passover kind of out in front of us in our sights, whether you're celebrating Passover at your home or maybe you're flying off to New York and making a connection to London. I hope there's no delays, by the way. If you can, do the nonstop. It helps to avoid it, whatever it is. But should there be a little turbulence on your flight or some hiccups along the way, it's all part of the journey and all part of memories that make life all the more fulfilling. Shabbat Shalom.